70% of Y Combinator's top 100 companies, I mean the absolute giants, they began with organic ideas.
Right.
Problems the founders were personally living through. That's an overwhelming number for just accidental discovery.
It is, but that leaves a really critical 30% that were manufactured. These were concepts born from deliberate systematic searching. They engineered it.
So can you really force a billion-dollar concept? Can you just sit down at a blank whiteboard and almost mechanically generate an idea that changes things?
Welcome to the deep dive where we're going to tackle exactly that. Today we are equipping you, the learner, with the second half of the YC idea generation framework. Our mission is pretty simple. Give you 7 proven recipes for when you're facing that blank page.
So we're moving beyond just waiting for inspiration. We're going to look at leveraging your unique strengths, how to spot opportunities others miss, and the meta strategies for positioning yourself.
Exactly, so that when those organic ideas do show up, you're actually ready to pounce. Let's get into it.
The distinction between organic and deliberate is it's so crucial. That 70% statistic is powerful, but it kind of makes success feel like a lottery, you know?
That you just have to stumble into a problem. But the sources confirm that systematic searching, that accounts for that other 30%. That's where we can get an edge.
And if we're talking deliberate searching, then we have to talk about Schlep Blindness.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is such a critical insight for that 30%. Great opportunities are so often ignored, not because they're impossible, but because the solutions require, well, tedious, unglamorous work.
Tedious work like navigating complex regulations or figuring out archaic logistics. People have Schlep blindness because they just don't want to get their hands dirty.
Exactly. It might involve manual processing or coordinating physical stuff or dealing with boring regulations. It doesn't sound like a cool startup pitch.
But that's precisely why it's so ripe for disruption. And the big mistake founders make is just assuming that wishing something existed is enough. That kind of thinking leads straight into a tar pit idea, right?
Totally. You fail to investigate why every other attempt to solve that problem has failed spectacularly.
You just run straight at it without understanding the history or the structural reasons. It's still a problem.
It's the difference between saying this should be easier and actually asking why it's so hard.
So if the best ideas often come from the schlep, from boring, intense labor, how do we find those opportunities that other people are just missing?
We have to strategically look where others are just fundamentally unwilling to go.
Okay, so let's start that systematic journey by looking inward. The first recipe is foundational. Start with your unfair advantage.
This is the founder market fit recipe baked right in.
What specific expertise or relationships or non-obvious insights does your team have that competitors just couldn't replicate overnight?
This takes some real self-reflection. I mean, think about Rezi, the real estate fintech company. Their founders didn't just have one specialty. They had deep backgrounds in both real estate and financial tech.
That overlap is key.
It is. It let them see these deep structural problems that the average Silicon Valley outsider couldn't even perceive, let alone solve. They started with their own asymmetrical knowledge.
The practical exercise here is so important. List your previous jobs, your internships, all of it. For each one, you have to ask, what problem did I see that no one on the outside could possibly see?
And that leads perfectly into the second recipe, which is kind of an evolution of the classic advice. Scratch your own itch, but, and this is critical, scratch it while you are in an unusual position.
Right. Don't scratch a generic itch that every college student has. The market is just saturated with those attempts.
The qualification is everything. It's not about wishing college apps were easier. It needs to be unique. Look at Vetcove. The founder's father was a veterinarian. That gave them a window into this messy world that tech founders almost never see. They saw that vet practices ordered supplies with like phone calls and paper catalogs.
Wow.
Yeah, and because there was no modern e-commerce platform, they were constantly overpaying and wasting time. Silicon Valley founders are not looking at veterinary supply chains.
It's the perfect example, an unusual position giving you insight into a market that is just desperate for help, a market with maximum schlep.
Exactly.
So we've seen how internal insight can spark an idea, but how do we navigate that line between a genuinely unique itch and, falling headfirst into a dangerous, overtried tar pit?
That's the challenge, right? A problem existing doesn't prove it's a good business. It just proves the problem is hard. And you need to perform what the sources call the check.
Okay.
Which brings us to the most common and I'd argue the most dangerous path.
The third recipe is the most human, but we have to approach it with maximum caution. Things you wish existed. DoorDash is the great example here.
The undeniable one. Stanford students wanted better local delivery, and they built it. And it worked, because they were willing to do the schlep.
Going door to door at first, but for every DoorDash, there are, what, hundreds of ideas that just become ghost town apps because the founder didn't do that diligence?
Precisely. You have to conduct the check. If you wish something existed and it doesn't, you must relentlessly ask why. Did the market try it 5 years ago and fail? If so, what's your genuine quantifiable insight into why you will succeed now?
It could be the tech wasn't ready or consumer behavior wasn't there yet.
Right. But if you don't ask, you're just running on an assumption. And honestly, when I try to validate these kinds of wishes myself, I still wrestle with confirmation bias in that early phase. I get pulled toward what I want to believe will work. It's a very human thing.
That bias is so real, you have to fight it with facts, which is why Recipe 4 is so powerful. It moves away from personal wishes and focuses on the environment. Look for recent changes.
Yes. Changes create these unique opportunity windows where a previously failed concept is suddenly viable.
It's all about timing. GatherTown is the perfect case study.
Totally. Pre-COVID, demand for their virtual hangout space was low. But the pandemic lockdowns created this massive immediate behavior change. Suddenly, the whole world needed a casual digital space.
They took advantage of that shift. A world event opened the window. The systematic approach here is to map shifts in 4 areas. Technology, like new GPT models, regulation, like GDPR, behavior, like remote work, and world events, like supply chain disruptions.
The sweet spot is where that change makes something newly necessary that was maybe just optional a year or two ago. Timing is everything.
So if we spot a working model that's now viable because of a change, is it enough to just adapt it for a new geographic market? Is that a safe bet?
Not entirely. Local pain points and regulations have to be rigorously validated first.
Okay, so Recipe 5 leans into that idea of adaptation. Find successful companies and create variants.
Right. The idea is you take a proven business model from market A and you just execute it exceptionally well in market B. You're focusing 90% on execution, 10% on proving the concept.
Nuvo Cargo is a great example. They looked at Flexport's model for digital freight forwarding and applied it specifically to Latin America.
Exactly. Flexport already de-risked the underlying model. Nuvo Cargo's job was to focus on execution excellence in a new, really difficult market.
But isn't cloning a model risky? How do you avoid just looking like a cheap knockoff?
The key is true variance. It has to be more than just a language translation. Good variants are true geographic transfers or rebuilding a horizontal product to be deeply industry-specific, like Viva did for pharma.
Got it. You can also vary the customer size or even the business model itself.
Which brings us to Recipe 6, which is maybe the most systematic hunting method of all. Talk to people through structured interviews. This is how you deliberately find hidden, messy pain points.
It requires months of what sounds like agonizingly boring legwork, but it must pay off with clear demand validation.
It does. Look at AtoB, which built a modern fuel card for the trucking industry. The founders didn't start with a solution. They went to truck stops for months, interviewed 20 to 30 drivers, and just meticulously mapped out their pain points with the existing messy systems.
So the boring work generated a tested idea before they even wrote a line of code.
Exactly. The procedure is simple but hard. Pick a space, find 20 to 30 people, and just ask open-ended questions about their frustrations. Don't pitch anything, just listen to the pain.
That structured listening is how you find the Schlep Blindness, the stuff that's so tedious people just assume it's part of the job.
Right.
So what if we want to tackle something really massive like a foundational industry, but we don't have that deep domain knowledge right away? Where do we start?
Go straight to the largest, most obviously broken sectors.
Okay, Recipe 7. Look for large broken industries. We're talking multi-trillion-dollar sectors that everyone complains about. Healthcare, real estate, legal services.
They're just begging for disruption, often because they're running on 20th century tech.
Flexport in freight forwarding, LegalZoom. These are the classic examples of attacking those giants. But the catch is, these industries are broken for a reason.
They are. Flexport had to deal with customs regulations and systems built decades ago. There are structural obstacles regulation, entrenched interests. You need insight into how you'll overcome those specific hurdles, not just build a better landing page.
The source also gave us a bonus recipe, which feels very practical. Find a co-founder who already has the idea or the domain expertise.
Yeah, if you lack the regulatory knowledge for Recipe 7, Find the partner who has lived that pain. It bridges the skill gap and validates the problem in one move.
It's founder market fit and technical execution all at once. Okay, let's zoom out to the meta strategy. Because if 70% of great ideas are organic, we need to maximize our odds of noticing them.
And the number one rule is to become an expert on something valuable. You have to deliberately put yourself in a fertile environment, go work at a high-growth startup, or in a domain right next to a changing technology.
We see this over and over. Stripe came from the Collison brothers' frustration with payments for their previous projects. You can't notice massive structural problems in spaces you don't actually live in.
The second meta strategy is deceptively simple. Build things. Side projects turn into companies all the time because you scratch an itch that turns out to be universal.
Right. So many developer tools start as internal projects that get open source because founders realize, wait, other people need this too.
Replica, the AI companion company, started as a personal project to build an AI version of a friend.
Whoa. Imagine scaling a simple personal side project like that to field 1 billion queries a day. The compounding effect of just continuously building it's undeniable.
So we've covered 7 recipes, 2 meta strategies. But after all that framework, we get to the final, unavoidable rule.
When in doubt, just launch.
The market test is everything. Overanalysis is a huge opportunity cost, especially in fast-moving sectors. You do the diligence to avoid the obvious tar pits, but if there's still uncertainty, you have to commit to building something minimal and testing it with real users.
Market feedback is it's so much higher quality than theory, always. Customers either pay or they don't. That signal is clear.
And most successful startups pivot anyway. The key is starting in a good idea space, getting that feedback, and iterating quickly. The practical advice is firm, set a deadline, 2 weeks for diligence, then 4 weeks to build a minimal version.
The meta lesson from YC's top companies is that the founders didn't have perfect, fully formed ideas. They positioned themselves in fertile spaces, they recognized real problems, and they acted immediately.
The framework gets you 90% of the way there. That last 10% is action.
As one source concluded, and this is really the core takeaway, often the only way to know if a startup idea is good is to launch it and find out.
So before you go, we'd encourage you to actually apply that unfair advantage exercise this week. Seriously. List your unique expertise, your jobs, the problems only you could have seen. What's your asymmetrical knowledge?
And here's a final thought. If 70% of great ideas start organically, how much time should we really spend on systematic brainstorming versus simply building deep, defensible expertise in a high-growth, fertile domain? The job is ultimately to notice the problem, not necessarily to invent it.